Welcome to Days of Our Cyber Lives, a podcast series brought to you by the Indiana Bond Bank and the Treasurer of the State of Indiana as part of the Indiana Bond Bank's Bondcast podcast series. My name is Mark Wuellner. I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Bond Bank, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Treasurer of the State of Indiana, the Honorable Kelly Mitchell. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Mark.
And also, as you can see on your screen, if you're watching, we are excited to be joined by our sometime guest, sometimes co-host, Chetrice Mosley-Romero, the Cybersecurity Program Director at the Indiana Office of Technology and the Indiana Department of Homeland Security.
Hello, glad to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you, and you're in the capacity of co-host today, so really excited about that.
Yes, yeah, and I've been keeping track of the couple episodes before, and I'm glad to see that Cyber Days of Our Lives have had some great guests, and then even some of your other Indiana Bond Bank podcasts have been great. So glad to be back, though.
Yeah, we're glad to have you, and you've brought a guest today to talk to us about how COVID-19 has been impacting our local healthcare systems. Chetrice, would you introduce our guest?
Absolutely. So with me today is Mitchell Parker, or Mitch. He's the CISO for Indiana University Health, or IU Health, which is the largest regional hospital operator in the area. I think in the tri-state or area, correct, Mitch?
In the state of Indiana.
Yeah. So we are very excited. He actually has the IU Health actually represents the healthcare sector on the governor's Executive Council on Cybersecurity. So they are always such a great partner. They lead the healthcare committee for the council and kind of are responsible for gathering all the great minds of healthcare throughout the state of Indiana to discuss, what we need to assist not just the large operators and their best practices, but how do we take those best practices and provide them to local government units in healthcare, which is whether that's, health county, hospitals or health department offices, even down to the small business operators that are doctors' offices and so on. So they have provided some amazing things over the last few years. And obviously, even with everything going on with COVID, they've been such a great partner on trying to figure out what do we need to get out to those that may not have the accessibility that they have with regards to intelligence with cybersecurity and healthcare, or the steps that we need to take to, even the smallest steps make a big difference in cyber, as we've discussed on this podcast. So Mitch is great at kind of breaking that down, because most certainly he is super smart on the technical side, but he gets that not all of us are technical. So, so I thought he'd be a great guest to talk about the many things relating to COVID-19 scams and cybersecurity threats that, continue to haunt us even now. So.
That sounds awesome. Welcome, Mitch. Let's start big picture. How has COVID-19 impacted IU Health from a cybersecurity standpoint?
First of all, thank you all very, very much for having me. And I'd like to say that IU Health is not unique like other health systems. The biggest challenges that every health system has had has been, number one, with a large chunk of the workforce moving to home. So work from home in healthcare has always been supported, but when you have 80% of your non-clinical workforce moving to work from home, that is a massive change. And a lot of systems that you once had are going to be stressed. And also just the sheer logistics in moving all these users home is a significant challenge. And building on that, you also have telemedicine. A lot of your elective surgeries and appointments have been canceled because you want to keep as few people in the hospitals as possible. It's because you want to make sure that the people that are there that really need the care have less of a risk of getting infected if they don't already have COVID. So telemedicine significantly spun up over the past year. And I was talking to a number of other health systems. I didn't talk to a single health system that didn't measure their increase in telemedicine in the thousands of percents.
Wow.
So this goes for everyone from small little practices all the way up to the IU Healths and the Mercies and the Mayos of the world. Everyone saw a massive increase, and so there had to be a focus on how do we effectively manage that. And combined with that, were a number of vulnerabilities out there, both with the telemedicine packages being utilized, with biggest example being the issues that Zoom had over the past year, along with several critical vulnerabilities that were found in virtual private networking packages, which were used for users to securely connect from their homes back to corporate networks. So it's been a massive challenge. And also, I could sum up with saying that having to manage a distributed environment has been a significant challenge for a number of people because, again, you're moving a large chunk of your workforce to working from home. And it's been almost a year now for most people. And the big issue you have is, how do you keep these people secure? It's a lot easier when all these PCs are sitting on your corporate network. When they're sitting in people's homes and you're dealing with people that are now sharing bandwidth, not with their coworkers, but with their family members doing e-learning or their spouses that are also working, you have to really think about how to best efficiently manage resources to keep these computers up to date and make sure that you're not putting additional family members or spouses at risk.
So I would probably imagine that you went from like hardly sleeping as a CISO pre-COVID to like not sleeping at all post-COVID. Because I remember we had an early on conversation right when like people were starting to like do stay-at-home orders and you know, moving people like within practically a weekend, and basically like, you know, critical infrastructure is just all going to home. And I remember specifically a call that you and I had, Mitch, that we were talking, okay, so quick, low-key, like low-hanging fruit resources. What do people need to know like right now? And you're like, home network. Like they need to make sure their router is not using the 1234 password it came with. If the router, I think you said, was older than 2-3 years old, they need to go out right now and buy another router, and make sure to change the password. And they need to make sure that they're using VPN, and that and not that isn't just good enough, but also making sure that if their printer is Wi-Fi and now they're connecting to this printer, that isn't a 1234 password or open network or doing those things. And I thought it was so interesting, you know, being as technical as it can get with the systems and everything and that side of it. Your first thing was operations in the sense of, we just changed our whole working environment, right? I mean, and that changed that is what changed across, not just like you said, just large companies, but even the smallest ones, right? All of a sudden, you know, a small organization or hospital of just a few hundred people and not 35,000 people were having to go home. That's still the same problem that CISO or that IT manager or even just that operations manager, because they may not have a CISO, is having to deal with, right?
Absolutely. And again, we talked to a number of people across the state. Most people don't even have a full-time IT staff member, and they had to get this figured out. But the home routers, you're right, that is low-hanging fruit, because you don't notice it when you've got one television and you're just watching Netflix. Mm-hmm. When you've got 2 kids doing e-learning or more, and you've got maybe a spouse in school like I do, and myself with a few computers up and running for my job, that internet bandwidth you have is going to go full tilt. And also, a number of the vulnerabilities that came out were directly aimed at home routers. Mm-hmm. So we've been giving this guidance for the past several years that if you get a new computer, get a router to go with it. Mm-hmm. Because the routers out there, we estimated the lifetime of getting security updates for them to be 18 months. And that's, to me, unconscionable, because people don't think of these things, and with COVID, now they have to think of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So
get a new router. That's a great suggestion. It's a piece of hardware I don't think most of us think about. You know, you talked about vulnerabilities, Mitch, because you don't have all these PCs on premises anymore. You know, I think that is probably applicable to not just healthcare, but any local government who's experienced work from home, or now you have different folks kind of tying into your network from different places. You know, what does that look like? Is that even like, you know, patient on their cell phone in the hospital lobby tying into your Wi-Fi? Like, where do those vulnerabilities come in, I think regardless of industry, what should we be thinking about?
Well, first of all, you need to be thinking that if you're running a Microsoft or Apple operating system, make sure they're set to automatically update. Even if they don't have managed updating services, you can still set them to manually automatically update. If you have endpoint detection and protection, we've actually been telling people to get rid of antivirus and use endpoint detection and response. And the reason why we've been doing that is because the threats out there have gotten so sophisticated that antivirus is no longer effective. And I've talked to people at large health systems and small systems alike who have made that switch to EDR and have seen significant improvement in their ability to detect malware. And that's everything these days. And also making sure that the critical applications they have are also kept updated because, again, I'll give the example of Adobe Flash. Adobe Flash was chock full of vulnerabilities. They just end of life that back in January. But a major challenge that organizations have had is there's a lot of organizations that didn't update their applications. And so you had some people still running Adobe Flash after Adobe had actually cut support. And this was not something new. Adobe had been planning this for several years because there was no way to update the product and keep it reasonably secure given what it does. And there's a very long explanation I can give that Dr. Spafford from Purdue could also chime in on, but the sum total of what the two of us would probably say would be, this is a product you can't secure. However, a lot of people built their corporate applications on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and no matter how big your business is or how small, it's a major challenge. And you have to take a look at items like that. Make sure you keep your corporate applications up to date, your operating systems, and your supporting technology, and make sure it's doing it, even if they're off site.
So I have a follow-up question to that, Mitch, if I may, Kelly and Mark. So, and not that I'm looking for a reason to buy a new computer. Never would I be looking for a reason to buy a new Mac. But when you're like, if you get like phones and you get like used phones or older phones, right? Or you get older computers, and at some point the operating system is no longer, like it stops at a certain operating system, and it's no longer supported by Apple or Microsoft or whatever that computer OS is. I mean, is that if it stops there, are you really leaving yourself open? Is that the time, kind of like to your point when you were talking about the router about every 18 months to 3 years, that like if your operating system is no longer the most updated operating system, that gap is not like a safe gap, it's actually a very unsafe gap, and that's probably the time that you need to reconsider getting something that is always the most updated and being supported by the most operating system?
Absolutely. And the case that happened with Apple a couple of weeks ago with the iOS 14.4 patch is exactly that. Apple is actually very good. They have given 5 years of support on average for an iPhone when you buy it brand new, which is incredible. And so if you have a supported iPhone, you can get that security patch and you can be protected. And just because it appeared in iOS 14 doesn't mean it didn't appear in a previous version. And there's a lot of people out there that have iPhones that can't support that version of Apple iOS that are vulnerable to some very serious vulnerabilities. And what's been going on in the world has been that there are actually groups that are using these vulnerabilities to install software on phones and monitor people. So it's very critically important to patch these vulnerabilities. And Apple's good if they have a page on their website that shows you exactly where to go and exactly what phones are supported. And we've used that in our own communications with our workforce. However, with Android, it's been a bit more of a challenge. Outside of Samsung, we've found that no vendor has been particularly clear about how long a device is supported for. And Samsung, we estimate about 2 years. So when it comes to the Android devices, it is less clear, and it is less clear for our customers also, which makes it difficult for us because again, not everyone is going to have the money for an Apple device, or they'll like the features on a Samsung or LG more than an Apple, and they'll buy that instead. However, I can't give a more definite answer on how long a device is going to be supported based on who the vendor is. Apple controls everything, Samsung controls everything, and they're going to give updates for a lot longer, whereas no one else really does, and it's kind of a mixed bag, and we've had to adjust how we manage risk specifically because of that factor.
I think that's such a good point because, you know, a lot of people, especially as we're coming into the new year and people are talking about budgets, they're talking about their operations, I think it's important to, especially for small businesses and local governments, but even ourselves, since we have such a merge with our work and personal life, right? So you may have a great work phone because your employer's on top of it, but if it's sitting right beside and even sharing the same accounts as your other phone, that your personal phone that is 10 years old or 6 years old or isn't being supported anymore, then there's a lot of, especially in this post-COVID world, when it comes to COVID scams and when it comes to vulnerabilities that we were talking about, it puts us more at risk. So not that if anybody wants to use this as a good reason to go update your stuff, it makes you more cyber secure. I definitely know I'll probably be asking for some new equipment just for fun. I have to be responsible after all. So, but yeah, so thank you, Mitch. I think that was really good information.
It really was. I definitely just wrote down, checked my phone and make sure it is doing the automatic updates. But yeah, that was a lot of good information. But you work with such a large organization that you really don't maybe have the control you'd like to have over all of these devices that are out there. Do you have any tips or tricks for management, people who are managing people that are working from home? Do you just communicate a lot with your employees? What is it that you could share with us?
Absolutely. And the biggest thing that we do is we constantly communicate with our customer base, because we view ourselves as only as strong as our relationships with our customers. And we also view ourselves as only being as effective as the trust our customers have in us to pick up the phone and give us a call if they think something is amiss. And I really pride myself on building that with our team and with our organization, because it also aligns with our values. And Dennis Murphy talks a lot, who is our CEO, talks a lot about living the values. And we try and infuse that in everything we do and in all of our communications, ultimately because we want to communicate trust and credibility to our customers, because we want to have what we call that virtuous feedback loop, where they come to us before it becomes a problem. And we're able to answer their questions as a trusted business partner, rather than the people that clean up and point the finger. We never want to point the finger at our customers. We want to help them, because ultimately our mission is to improve the health of every citizen in the state of Indiana. And you don't do that without trust, without credibility, and without living the values. So everything we do is about constant communication, making sure our workforce understands, and when there's a big enough event, making sure Dennis and his leadership team have the information that they need to be able to make a credible and informed decision to protect our ability to take care of citizens of the state of Indiana.
Mitch, this is amazing. I'm sitting here taking notes, and I know we've talked about, we want to kind of pivot into some, ways to find resources if you're cash strapped and local governments are resource strapped, and I think you're going to provide some insights on that. But before we leave it, you said something that I think you kind of killed a sacred cow, which is the antivirus. Like, I think I heard you say it's not effective anymore. And I think for schlubs like me who just kind of know the basics, like, got my antivirus running. Like I've got the most recent antivirus, the whatever product I'm using, it's working. Did I hear you right? And then you mentioned endpoint detection response. And for, again, folks like me who are listening to this, what in the world is that? How does it work? So we should be doing that instead of like the typical antivirus that we all kind of have grown up on?
Absolutely. So the way antivirus works is it uses a fixed set of definitions to scan your memory and other computer resources to look for patterns of malware. The problem is malware has gotten so sophisticated over the past several years that it is no longer effective in detecting when malware actually exists on a computer system. And partially buoyed by the fact that Apple had done significant work in security with the iPhone, malware's gotten sufficiently sophisticated. And also based on the work Google's done with the Chrome web browser, again, they've gotten so good that malware has gotten better.
Yeah.
So think of EDR, endpoint detection and response, as more of antivirus 2.0. where it uses more intelligent technologies, your internet connection, and the ability to do more intelligent pattern searching and use intelligent systems both located on your computer and in the cloud to be able to find and detect malware that antivirus just can't because it's just not smart enough to do so.
And for clarification, Mitch, I mean, what we hear like really big words like, like Norton, for example, right? I mean, there are some companies that have actually already moved into that version 2.0 of them. They're really kind of doing real threat analysis and incorporating it. It's not just a stagnant, like, look for this A, B, and C. And that might be something you find in providers that may not sound as familiar, are not really the big ones because they don't have necessarily the kind of bandwidth behind them, to actually do that intel consistent. Is that correct?
That's correct. And a lot of these companies they've become the big companies. Like, for example, Symantec, which had Norton Antivirus for years, recently got sold to an Asian conglomerate, Broadcom, and they're on their way towards, maintenance. But larger companies such as Cylance, which got purchased by BlackBerry, Carbon Black, which got purchased by VMware, and CrowdStrike has an incredible following in higher ed and healthcare, have stepped in. And Microsoft, who is one of the biggest names of all, also has their Defender products for business, which, again, they went 2 years ago. I could not have that conversation with you and still keep a straight face like this. Now they have one of the top products on the market. And again, they have excellent support and services via TechSoup or other resources for small governments and small organizations. So I think there's some new names out there, but there's also some great big ones like Microsoft that are providing these EDR services.
Thank you for that. So this is a great conversation for us to go back, and I think anyone listening, go back to your IT support and ask them, do we have an EDR, right? What does that look like? Have we kind of evolved past antivirus 1.0? And so I can bring the conversation kind of back to where we were originally going. Mitch, I think we may have shared with you that the state CISO, Hemeth Jain, joined us, just last podcast, and shared a couple of resources and strategies for local units who just by nature are resource constrained, and how they might engage expertise.
Yeah, he talked about how local units could maybe pull together and contract as one entity with a provider and divide the share the cost, divide the resources. Was one of the ideas he had.
Absolutely, I agree with that, and that's actually an incredible idea.
And I think Mitch, maybe I think where Treasurer's going, where I'm going, is it's great in concept, but how do you do that? How do you even, whether it's the interview, like what are you asking? How do you even write the RFP? Whether you're an individual entity or you're kind of trying to share a service, most of us don't work in this day to day. So it's almost like, the the home construction comes out, like how do you even ask the questions to know you're getting somebody who's legit and can do the job and is not trying to sell you kind of a bill of goods by bombarding you with technical jargon or slick presentations?
Ultimately, what it comes down to is that if you're a healthcare entity that operates in the United States that handles patient data, you are required to have several different deliverables on an annual basis. Number one is your risk assessment, which organizations can do for free. The Office of National Coordinator for Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the Department of Health and Human Services offers a free system readiness assessment tool. You don't have to pay a significant amount of money to have someone do a risk assessment for you. And there's a lot of companies out there that will charge you thousands of dollars to do a risk assessment, and they'll give you that slick PowerPoint. But ultimately, what the government's looking for is what you're doing with it. So if you're going to contract for anything, it would be for that gap analysis between your risk assessment findings and where you need to be. And from that gap analysis, a plan to get there in a 1 to 2 year time frame, and finally a plan for following up, aka a good operational management plan to maintain a good risk posture. And what they're looking for is not for you to buy some product that claims that does it all on a technical level. They are looking for a combination of technical and non-technical resources, including policy and procedure development. Mm-hmm. And there are some good consulting firms out there in the state of Indiana and some national ones that can provide that. But again, if you're a small provider, you might want to consider contracting for a risk assessment. And it's not going to cost you that much if you use the SRA tool. And honestly, that's what the government's looking for. Contracting for a gap analysis, a risk management plan, aka what do I need to get from gap analysis to a good security posture? And more importantly, how do you maintain that good security posture going forward? And there's a lot of organizations that get mixed up in thinking they can just buy tech and get out of it. And sadly, there's a lot of security companies that do the same thing. And they claim, hit a button and you're HIPAA compliant. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of HIPAA is to ensure that organizations have good policies, procedures, and processes to ensure that the data that healthcare organizations like mine are entrusted to protect on behalf of the patients are being done correctly, and to make sure that this is being done on a continual basis as part of the business. Not something where you can point at a piece of software and go, yeah, we're HIPAA compliant. That's not the intent, that's not the aim, and I think that's been a big misnomer in security, very specifically with healthcare, is that there's been a message being sent to small businesses that says you can buy your way out of HIPAA compliance. And the truth is, that was never the intent, and more importantly, the intent is to build the mindset within the organization that, first of all, it's not your data, it's the patients. Second of all, you're entrusted to protect it on behalf of the patients, much like a government is entrusted to perform services on behalf of its citizens. And more importantly, how to show on a continual basis that you are protecting the data and information for those you are entrusted to protect. So when you go in there with that mindset, you take a look at doing a risk assessment, gap analysis, risk management plan, an operational plan for maintaining what you have, and you frame it in that manner, suddenly you're thinking a lot more about the mission of your organization, which is to protect data you are entrusted to that belongs to somebody else, not you. And when you think about it that way, and you think about your mission, it becomes a lot easier to think about it in terms of the right processes to have to protect your friends and neighbors, not about cool tech that looks good and pew pew maps, as we like to joke about.
I love that. Pew pew. You know, I love the fact that, and you know, you were focusing a bit on HIPAA, but which, you know, all of us know because we all have to sign it a million times every single time we go to a doctor's office for understandable reasons. But you know, that's from a data perspective, but those same concepts of understanding your risk, understanding your gap, figuring out how to operationally fix that, tying that back to organization, those type of things are what you should be doing for your operations as well, right, Mitch? And making sure that it all, like, you know, if you're focusing on like the operations of a water system, like we unfortunately saw with in Florida that was attacked this last week, or, you know, if you're focusing on whether or not the operations of a vendor who's providing you, you know, technology to your actual core operations, whether that's like bedside stuff for you, right, Mitch? Or if you're an operations on the manufacturing or small business, that they're also, as vendors, are doing those things. And I think, you know, I love that you said, you know, if it's a kind of one click, it takes care of it all, and it's all tech speak, that's probably your number one flag. Because when it comes to cybersecurity, it's supposed to be operations. It's not just an IT issue, it's an operations issue. So if they're not asking you about cyber policies for organization, they're not asking you how are you communicating this, how are you training this to your employees, how does this affect, and how's this going to be, you know, reported out so that you can do something with it, I would say take a pause, go back and do a bit more research, because that to me would be the red flag. Usually when I talk to vendors, if they're all only ones and zeros basically in their speak, I'm like, you know, I'm kind of thinking they're like, this is the thing to solve it all. I'm like, well, if it's cybersecurity related, I definitely know you haven't talked about business, you haven't talked about policy, you haven't talked, and these are the best practices, gap analysis, operation planning, and then how to review and repeat that whole cycle. So I think that's a real value that, you know, not just healthcare organizations can take, but local government organizations, small businesses, manufacturing, defense companies. I mean, it crosses the entire board of industries, and it's the same best practices over and over again, right, Mitch?
Absolutely. And again, before I worked in healthcare, I worked in defense and can tell you this, we use the same methodologies for defense that we use in healthcare now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
I mean, I think that's, yeah, you know, it's good to hear that. You know, it's one of those we wish, I think it's human nature, right? Can I take this one pill to lose weight, regrow my hair, and stop aging? And it's, right, I think you need to stop that mindset with the cyber vendor. Like if I was sitting across the table, I would love if they said, hey, just install this doodad and you're done, right? Because that's what everybody wants to hear. There's other stuff they want to work on. They don't want to do the work. But I think hearing that this is a business process and it's not solvable with the one, you know, magic blue pill, right? You've got to work at it. And if somebody's telling you don't have to work at it, as Chetrice said, treat that as a number one flag. So I appreciate that, Mitch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, I'll frame it in a different way. When I worked in defense, I would never let something get to the general that didn't have a good operational management plan in there. And if you couldn't explain it to the general, why would you even bother? And we take the same mindset on our team with everything security. If I can't explain it to our senior leadership team in 30 seconds, we don't do it.
yeah. Yeah, that's a great way of taking that. I know, you know, kind of going back to kind of our original kind of why we wanted to talk a little bit about healthcare, you know, we can't go without one news cycle without understandably hearing not only about the COVID vaccine, which, you know, thank goodness that we're kind of in this year further along than we were this time last year when we didn't even know it was happening. And now we at least have, you know, somewhat of a solution to get us out of this, you know, long dark tunnel that we've been in. So there's light at the end of the tunnel now. But, you know, with everything that's good, I always feel, especially in this role, because it's ruined me a little, in the sense that if I hear anything great, it's automatically followed in my head with what's the cybersecurity ramifications of it? What's the dark side that the cyber actors, because there's just bad people out there who's going to like, hey, that's great, but how do we exploit that? And how do we exploit and take advantage of the like human feelings, right? Like our excitement of wanting to get our family protected, or healthcare's excitement and their workers of, hey, we can finally help people so we're not seeing the kind of, you know, really alarming statistics and people who were dying from this and still are. So, you know, I think And really just kind of want to make that the kind of final thing that we talked about, is these COVID scams, right, Mitch? I mean, you and I have talked about it again since day one. We knew the first exploit they were going to do is work from home stuff. Like they're like, that's where they're first going to go. You know, from my perspective, and I know we've talked about it, Mitch is second one, and I think Kelly, we talked, the first one, right, the work from home, right,
Yeah.
and the many things about what we do from there, and those vulnerabilities. But how do we kind of attack that on a personal side and a professional side? This has evolved obviously over this last year, and now we're going into vaccines and the continuation of that. And so I mean, it's kind of scary, right? I mean, it's just a matter of, and I can't even imagine from the commissioners at local governments and all those entities. I mean, Kelly, you probably have a better idea as far as, you know, what they're thinking in this when this is all happening.
Oh, I think this is one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, is so that we can provide information for sure to the people who were in the position I used to be in as a county commissioner. And we did indeed touch on the cybersecurity risks of working from home, and in this episode and a few others. But I think you're talking about something even beyond that. There are vulnerabilities that cyber criminals are exploiting. Like you said, Chetrice, you immediately go to how can someone, how is someone looking at this and thinking about how can they exploit this? And I certainly want to hear some of the current cyber scams and that are related to both COVID and the vaccine that we should be looking out for.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that we can talk about has been the sense of urgency. The biggest item that we've seen that's been in common with every scam out there, and it's now extending into vaccines, has been every single one of them has a sense of urgency, whether it's the text messages that thousands of people across the state of Indiana have gotten saying you need to apply now for stimulus funds, which has happened, and we've had to warn our workforce about it, and to also apply now for getting preference for vaccines, and people do send spam emails for that, instead of going to the resources from the state of Indiana that have been provided. We have, again, scams work by exploiting our sense of urgency and our need to want to protect others. And they want us to override that sense of judgment that we have to be able to do actions that we normally would not. And so COVID has been very jarring, and it's taken a lot of people out of normal elements and put them in situations where they're more vulnerable because they can't check. So the best advice I can give to people, given all these scams, is to really, when they get a message like that, that asks them to act with a sense of urgency and asks them to bypass normal steps and reasoning processes that they normally would, is to stop and to take that 30 seconds to think, is this really the case? And more importantly, ask the question of others, is this a real message? Or is this something that even sounds realistic? Because we've seen upticks in the Social Security number scams where people from boiler rooms across the world call into Indiana and tell people their Social Security numbers have been suspended. We've seen a lot of pretexting scams where people call up using information they've obtained either in data breaches or that's publicly available on the internet, saying that they need the complete information for you. And we've seen numerous fake charity scams. Again, a lot of people calling up, and I'm really sad to see this, calling up with fake charities that use the names of police and fire in them. I won't even dignify them by saying their full names. And again, people think of our heroes that are working every day to safeguard us and using that against us by trying to scam us out of money. One case, police scammer or COVID scammer called my house, told me what they were, and I said, I think you're a scam. I got a torrent of expletives worthy of Andrew Dice Clay. So this is something that, again, take the few seconds. Someone says they are calling up for getting a vaccine now. Hang up and use the state of Indiana's resources. Someone calls saying they want a donation to a charity now. Say you'll get back to them, look up the charity. There's a charity navigator out there that will help you determine if that's a legitimate charity or not. Sadly, if they're calling you unsolicited from a charity, more than likely it's not legitimate. Or if it's someone saying you'll get stimulus funds immediately, that's more than likely a scam. And what they're going to do is get your credit card number, and you don't know where that's going. So you have to be very, very careful these days. And also the other thing I recommend, take a look at your credit card bills. Take a look and see what charges have been out there. Because we've seen a pretty sharp uptick in credit card fraud across the board in the past year, because people are using credit cards more because they're using them from home. When you think about it, people are doing a lot more online ordering than they ever were. Amazon just had a record-breaking year, as did Walmart. So think about all the places those credit cards have gone, and they haven't always gone to retailers that have done a good job with credit card security, or stores that have done good credit card security. They're going to places, some places that may not do security so well, so you may see some charges on there. So always be vigilant about that. And whenever possible, also use a virtual credit card number. But again, the most important thing I can't stress enough, take that pause, and it's got a sense of urgency. Take that step back, because that sense of urgency is the common root cause in getting you to act outside of your element and fall for these scams.
I think the new like saying I say to people when we're talking about scams is, used to be trust but verify, and now it's no, do not trust and always verify. We're no longer in a very few little bit, that kind of thing. We're always in a consistent, because of how easy and sophisticated bad actors have become. To Mitch's point, they are getting so good at knowing your regional needs, your specific area, even to the personal kind of side of things, where because of how we are, everything out there, things, some stuff that is public information that people, take from and stuff. So I think it is really important that if it seems too good to be true, so if you're all of a sudden as a healthcare worker or health department, county department worker saying, here's a free vacation for all your work, that would be awesome. And I hope that's the case, but go and verify that truly is the case. Do not click the link. And always double check those things. And, to Mitch's point, say, even if you don't want to be rude, be like this, if you don't want to be rude and tell the person they're lying, even though unless you're for sure, because I do the same thing, I'm like, nope, this is not a thing. Then I would most certainly go say, okay, well, let me get back with you, because nothing, if you don't know about it, it's not going to be an ASAP situation. If you didn't expect it coming your way, there's nothing in our lives that's an ASAP situation. And needing to get something to somebody that you had even no idea that something was happening in that area, like a collections bill or a medical bill or a social security number problem, or you're all of a sudden there's a warrant out for your arrest, or whatever the case to be. You would have been told, you would have known that that's coming. So if you didn't know it was coming and it's all of a sudden there at your door, of your text door, then always assume it's a scam. And that's what we always just see. Now we're seeing scams with like, hey, give us your information and we'll get you a vaccine today. And again, playing to people's need to protect themselves, protect their families, and they're asking, okay, what's your social, and give us a credit card number to make sure we have your spot in your series. Like, it's these terrible things that really play to the fact that like people are fearful for their lives. And so, always double check and share that, anybody who's hearing this podcast, share that to people like senior citizens who maybe aren't listening to these type of things, because the more we talk about it with our friends and our family and our coworkers, the more that they are more aware that like, hey, don't trust and always verify. Don't click the link and go somewhere else where it's valid, like IN.gov, or if it's coming from a specific agency like IU Health is offering free vaccines, then go to their main website, because if that's the case, it's going to be on their main website. It's not going to be some hidden page or something, secretive and like that, if that's happening at a big level. But honestly, media would have it, right? And so always verify from that. But thank you so much, Mitch. I think you've definitely always proven to be such a great person I can bring along to any and all of these things from your vast experience, but also just kind of being able to break it down to like real steps people can take. I think this is really helpful for us.
Thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity.
I mean, what a great episode, Mitch. I mean, I think what a pleasant surprise. Like, I think I came in expecting just kind of IU Health and maybe some advice for our regional and local health systems. But I tell you, jotted down just the little nuggets that you put in about, devices that we've got and are they still being supported, and questions to ask potential vendors. Gosh, I mean, even antivirus and just if you can't explain it to your boss, should you really be doing it? And just this episode was loaded. I mean, just loaded with wisdom, top to bottom. And so thank you for joining the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Very welcome, and have yourself a great weekend, everyone. Again, I really appreciate it. And again, we appreciate getting the chance to work with others, because ultimately we look at it this way. What the work we do serves everyone, and we understand, we appreciate that, and we want everyone to improve, because ultimately we all see the same patients.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mark, I took a ton of notes, so I just really appreciate it. And thank you very, very much for joining us. And Chetrice, thank you for returning as a guest co-host for this episode. You always bring the best guests. Who do you have in mind for the future?
I mean, I'm kind of thinking something to honor maybe our the next month is Women's History Month. So, I think there's some really amazing women leaders in Indiana at not only local but state level. So maybe I'll get to bring a couple of guests there. And I definitely think there's much to talk about when it comes to local government. The water utility was definitely an eye opener. So, I think, maybe something along that lines, just to make sure that we all are providing all of your listeners as many resources as possible to be as secure as possible. So.
Thank you. I think that would be fantastic, just to, I think, even doing a quick episode on what just happened, as you said, in Florida, and learning and seeing how we might learn from that in Indiana. As that national cyber scene changes, our podcast will continue to evolve and adapt and bring on guests to speak to those issues of the day. And I think from my end, that's really all I've got today. It's been great to have a small part of this conversation, but as Treasurer said, just mostly listen and take a lot of good notes. So Mitch, thank you again. To those listening, thank you. This is Mark Wuellner from the Indiana Bond Bank signing off. And Kelly, would you close us out today?
Yeah, from the Treasurer of State's office, this is Kelly Mitchell saying thank you for tuning in to Days of Our Cyber Lives on the Indiana Bondcast. See you next episode.